And we are live.
I call the Committee of Whole Planning Administration meeting to order. I'd ask you to rise as you're able for the reading of the invocation. As we come together today, we recognize the great responsibilities laid upon us. Our council will always strive to understand the needs of the people we serve and use power wisely and well. Our purpose is to establish and maintain a city of prosperity and righteousness where freedom prevails and where justice rules. Let us also not forget those who served our community and who are no longer with us, so that we can continue to do the work we must in their memory. Please be seated. Mr. Clerk, has a roll call been taken?
Through the chair, roll call has been taken.
Members of the committee, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest or items for the agenda today? I see none. Separation of items for consideration, consent items for separation. Any separation items? I see none. We have two automatically separated. 7.11 will automatically separate it because we have a presentation, and 7.1.6.2 because it requires appointments of members of council to a committee. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, 7.1.3 and 7.1.5 as well, please.
Councilor Martin, 7.1.3 and 7.1.5.
Thank you.
Sorry, I must not have seen your hand. Anybody else? Seeing none. All right. Thank you. Councilor McCreary, can you please move the motion to approve all items for consideration and consent of 7.1, 7.2, not separated for discussion purposes?
Sure, thank you. Certainly I will. It's moved by me, seconded by Councilor Martin.
I will now call the vote on all items not separated for discussion purposes. Clerk, please read the titles of those items not subject to the vote.
Through the chair, the following items are subject to the vote. Item 7.1.2, benefit plan carrier multi-year request for proposal. 7.1.4, proposed amendments to the delegation of authority bylaw and policy. 7.1.6.1 of the building construction process review task force report, City of Brantford site plan control, site alteration and security release. Item 7.1.7, community heritage and cultural space task force report. And item 7.2.1.1, committee of the whole planning and administration meeting minutes of the June 14th, 2022 meeting.
And then we are entering now the statutory public hearing process. The title? Oh, call of question. Sorry. I got to vote on it. Thank you.
Frozen. Thanks.
All items not separated for discussion purposes carries unanimously on recorded vote of 10-0. Members of the committee voting in favor are as follows: Councilors Vanderstel, Slaz, Martin, and Toski, Wall, Van Tilburg, Carpenter, McCreary, Sokoli, and Mayor Davis.
Okay, now we'll enter the statutory public hearing process, and I think Mayor Davis, this is where you take the chair.
Thank you, Councilor Carpenter. So we have one public hearing on tonight's agenda. The public meeting is held in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act. The purpose of the hearing is to discuss the planning application, to hear from the public either in support of or against the application. At the end of the public meeting, the committee will pass a recommendation, which is generally considered for a final decision at the next meeting of council. The name of anyone who speaks in regards to the item tonight will appear within the meeting minutes. Anyone wishing notice of any further proceedings regarding the application should also provide their name and address with the clerk's office. The procedure we follow is that the applicant speaks first, followed by municipal staff, and then the public. The applicant then has an opportunity to provide clarification on any questions or issues raised during the meeting. So we'll now consider the one item that's before us today, which is 5.1. It's an application for zoning bylaw amendment PZ 1622. It's 177 Colburn Street West. And the IBI group is appearing as the applicant on behalf of the owner, which is the corporation, the City of Brantford. So if you please proceed with the presentation.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for having us here today. My name is Odette Gomes. I'm a planner with IBI Group, and I am here representing the property owners. I also have Ms. Deb Schlicker with us here today, who will also help answer some questions for us at the end of the presentation. So next slide, please. So the property is located at 177 Colburn Street West in the city of Brantford. If I can have the next slide, if possible. Yeah, thank you. The property does consist of 1,940 square meters, which is approximately 0.2 hectares. It has approximately 54 meters of frontage on Colburn Street and 30 meters of frontage on Winnett Street. The lands are currently vacant. So the previous lease for the commercial portion fronting onto Colburn Street, that lease ended in 2021. Next slide, please. So the lands are currently zoned general commercial FC8, and the application before you today is to rezone the lands to general commercial exception 105 zone, which would be to permit a mixed use building. And next slide, please. The proposed development is a purpose-built affordable housing development that will be owned and operated by the city of Brantford and will be targeted towards providing housing for those in the emergency shelter system, notably older adults transitioning into the community with low support needs. The proposed development will also count towards the target of 506 new affordable municipally owned and operated housing units created between 2020 and 2030. The proposed development also aligns with the municipal priorities and strategic plans. The proposed development is a 4-story mixed-use building with ground floor commercial of approximately 201 square meters. Floors 2 to 4 will consist of 26 studio units, and 4 of those units will be barrier-free. A total of 16 parking spaces are being provided at a rate of 0.51 spaces per dwelling unit and 1 space per 101 square meter of commercial space. The general offices, I apologize. The parking for the dwelling units is also appropriate as the users are those who have experienced homelessness with low support needs. Based on other similar sites, this population tends not to have a lot of car ownership. This proposed development is on a main traffic corridor with access to transit services. Bus stops are nearby. Part of the programs is to promote transit use for the tenants and offer incentives like bus passes. Provided for the use of the tenants, which will be suitably screened, including fencing and landscaping. Next slide, please. The subject lands are located within the existing built-up area of the city of Brantford, including residential, industrial, and commercial. The proposed development will infill underutilized lands. The subject sites are ideal for the proposed affordable housing development, as the lands are located within the urban area boundary, designated strategic growth area along an intensification corridor, as well as being in close proximity to the city's downtown. The inclusion of bike stalls within the proposed development will support active transportation, enabling residents to travel to various amenities and uses. It is in close proximity to multiple municipal transit routes running along Colburn Street. The central location to necessary amenities, food, stores, medical service, etc., will support future affordable housing residents. The proposed development has convenient walking access to park spaces and trails, including Cockshut Park, which is only located a 10-minute walk away. In conclusion, we are here in support of staff's report and the recommendations for approval. It is my professional opinion that proposed development has regard for matters of provincial interest outlined in the Planning Act, is consistent with the provincial policy statement, conforms to the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, conforms to the City of Brantford's official plan. The proposed development is supported by all the required studies submitted with the application, and it represents good planning that is in the public interest, which implements compatible urban design and meets the social, environmental, and economic considerations of land development. We ask that you approve the rezoning application before you. I thank you for your time, and we're very happy to answer all of your questions tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Odette. Are there any members of the committee would like to ask any questions of, yes, Councillor Vanderstel?
Thank you, Mayor Davis. Through you to Odette. You mentioned that the need for parking is somewhat, if not significantly, diminished due to the fact that some of the people who will be occupying these units most likely won't have transportation of their own at this point. Could you say a little bit more about that, or perhaps Marlene as well?
Certainly, thank you. Through the chair to Councillor. The tenants that are coming to these units, again, they're coming from the shelter system. They're coming from homelessness. They have a lot of other needs, very important needs than car ownership. Car ownership is something that will come later on in their future. Ms. Deb Schlicker is also here, and she can maybe provide a little bit more information on that. We also have the city-owned project over on Marlene Avenue as well, which we used kind of as consideration for this as well. There are 30 units in that development there, and none of the tenants, so 0 tenants of the 30 that live there have parking spots, use any of the parking spots that are there. And Ms. Schlicker, I don't know if you want to add anything more about that as well.
Thank you. Through the chair. Yes, this is just the history of other buildings where we've got people who are coming out of the shelter system. Car ownership is very, very unusual, even especially if you are on Ontario Works or ODSP. Owning a car is very difficult to do on that income. Thanks.
Follow up, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
So as I understand it, being one of the first steps in transitional, I guess we can call it transitional housing from not having a place to live to this stage, I promise I won't say the word affordable housing because it'll get me in hot water again. But the bottom line is this is just one of the many steps that we're trying to take in order to ensure that we're providing housing for those who so desperately need it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Questions, Councillor McCreary?
Mayor, thank you. Odette, welcome. I'm sure the public is probably wondering tonight, and perhaps we can offer an explanation. We are both the proponent and the adjudicating body. I wonder if you could provide an explanation as to why we have a consultant representing us to us.
So the City of Brantford Housing Department is a separate department from the city that owns the property. Therefore, they have to hire a consultant to represent them. And again, Deb Schlicker, you might want to provide your thoughts on this as well.
Yes, through the chair. This is a development project that has been contracted out to ANC to provide the design build for this particular project because it's modular. And they are the ones who hired Odette as their architect and design team and consultants. So that is why Odette is presenting for us today. Thanks.
Councillor Sless, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to probably to Deb. Deb, the commercial space in this building, is that to house any of the wraparound services that we see at Marlene, or is that strictly retail?
I will let Marlene answer that question. Thanks.
Thank you. Through the chair, Marlene Miranda, General Manager of Community Services and Social Development. So the plan is for office use, and we will be housing some housing support staff to support the tenants in that. It will be a different type of housing where it's not that high level of supportive housing that's currently at Marlene Ave. As already mentioned, it's for low support needs. So that commercial space, in addition to some housing staff, staff are still exploring what that might be. As you know, CSSD's vision is to offer services across the city and county, and staff are exploring options that we could put into that commercial space to accommodate the CSSD accommodation strategy. We're also exploring for that commercial space some system partnerships so that we can have some common shared space for ease of access for the tenants and the residents within the community, and also to support coordinated service delivery. So just to summarize, the commercial space we're still looking at what's going in there. It will be office use, but it will not be, to answer your question directly, to have that level of support such as at Marlene Ave.
Thank you. And just further, being on social services, I'm somewhat aware of the project and what it entails. I think the folks in the neighborhood should understand that this will go up very quickly. It's a prefab building, and my understanding, and please confirm if you could, Marlene or Deb, but I believe the building is pretty well manufactured already, and it's just a matter of assembly on the site. Is that true?
That's correct.
Yeah, so through the chair, that's correct. It is a modular build, and the units are pretty much constructed. So once approved, the construction will be fairly quickly, and we are aiming for late fall for completion.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sicoli, you're next.
Yes, thank you. I've received quite a few emails about this because I think on paper outwardly, the parking can look quite scary. So Marlene, I'm hoping you can shine some light on some alternatives to parking that are being explored or that were explored with myself and Councillor Vanderstelt about this. It's my understanding that we are looking at a different location across the street in case we find ourselves in a position with overflow parking being needed. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, through the chair, thank you for the question. And further to what Odette's already spoken to as far as the parking and the type of residents that will be housed in these units, we do own, the city does own the lot behind, and we are working on earmarking that for extra parking and for the office and for the residents who will occupy the building. So there is exploration on that additional parking behind the current property.
That's everything from me. Thank you.
Councillor Wall.
Thank you. So you can hardly go anywhere on the internet, at least, even in person. People see a project like this and they immediately say, well, how come you're not building tiny homes on spots like this? But then you look at the report and it's a bunch of bachelor apartments and one-bedroom apartments, and it's basically a building full of tiny houses. But they're not the same. And I was wondering if anybody could comment on, one, why it's not tiny houses, and then two, how similar this is to case houses or tiny houses, and why this is the more practical solution.
Through the chair, I can start with the answer here. These units are the exact same units that were modular constructed at 18 Sturton Avenue. So exactly same size, 330 square feet. They are tiny houses. They're just stacked tiny houses. So here what we're trying to do is get the best use out of a small parcel of unused property. And by putting a number of units rather than just a few, like a fourplex, we are getting 26 units on the same piece of property. Thanks.
So just to clarify, the city of Brantford is building tiny houses, just better, more practical, more efficient tiny houses in the sky.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Antosky.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to Marlene, I think. So just for some further clarification, when we're talking about the commercial space below, I'm hearing, you know, we're looking at options for it, and can I surmise from that that we know that we're going to need it and we have 2 or 3 options or some options that we're going to use it for, or did we just need to do the mixed build? Because my question would be is if we don't know what we're using it for, why wouldn't we just put more residential units in there?
I can answer that through you,
Thanks.
through the chair to Councillor. The reason for having the mixed built use is also that it allows us for the lower reduction of parking. So a mixed use building requires less parking than the just a regular residential building. And this will also just kind of allow for a better storefront along Colborne Street. So instead of just having residential, you have the mixed use that kind of fits into the community that's there. That's basically the reason for that.
Okay, but if we wanted to reduce parking, we could do that through zoning. Okay, I'll follow up beyond this. Thanks very much, Odette.
Thank you.
Well, Odette, doesn't look like there are any other questions. So please stay around because of course you do get the wrap up once we've heard from staff and the public. So we'll now move into the second stage of the public hearing, which is hearing from our planning department staff.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the committee. My name is Jeff Medeiros. I'm a senior planner with the Planning Department of the city, and I'm here this evening to present the staff recommendation report for PZ 16-2022, which is for 177 Colborne Street West. The purpose of the application and why I'm presenting in front of you this evening is to discuss the planning application for a zoning bylaw amendment, and it's to facilitate the proposed mixed-use building with 26 residential units and then the ground floor commercial space. The subject lands are vacant as the applicant has indicated. Previously had a commercial billboard situated on the property in the southwest corner. And as it relates to the neighborhood itself, it's very much a mixed-use neighborhood. Residential to the north, to the southwest, primarily commercial east of the site along Colborne Street West, green space, parks, the Grand River, and some industrial just a little bit further to the north of the subject lands. In terms of the development proposal, I won't go into too much detail. 4-story mixed-use building, has parking, has a loading space, accessible parking with a small ground floor commercial space, approximately 2,000 square feet, give or take. Access to the site is from Winniette, as you can see from the screen. That's the primary access to the site with the driveway, with the building placement primarily orientated towards Colborne Street West. From the provincial policy and official plan considerations, proposals consistent with the growth plan and the provincial policy statement. The subject lands are designated with an intensification corridor designation that came into light with a new official plan that was adopted by City Council last year. Mixed use buildings are very much permitted and encouraged in this land use designation. Having mixing of uses, residential with the ground floor component fits the mold of what is envisioned in the official plan for this specific location. As I said, it is a zoning amendment. Property does have commercial zoning on the property today. You'll notice on the screen there's an F prefix. That means it's in a flood zone. The Grand River Conservation Authority has commented on the proposal, and their comments are appended to the staff report. The applicant is proposing not to remove the commercial zoning, but rather to add a site-specific exception, which I'll go into a bit more specific details in the next slide. So mixed-use building. Generally speaking, mixed-use buildings are permitted in the C8 zone. When you dive into the bylaw in that section, you'll see that you have to be located within a certain area of the city as illustrated on a schedule at the back of the bylaw. This property is just outside of that schedule. It sits just to the limits of the where mixed-use buildings are permitted, stop in Norwich Street, which is literally 1 or 2 buildings to the east of the site. So that's the first request as part of the site-specific amendment, is to permit a mixed-use building. The other component is the parking requirements. 2 separate ratios are proposed, one being for the residential component of 1 space per 50 or 1 unit per 0.51 spaces, and then a commercial component or the non-residential component, which is tied back to gross floor area. From staff's perspective, firstly, as it relates to the mixed-use building, staff are in support of that use. It very much fits the vision of the official plan and are in support of that request. As it relates to the parking requirement, as the applicant said, this is a purpose-built affordable housing development. It's managed by the city. The city has the ability to control in some aspects who the end user is. As the applicant has indicated, the end user in this particular building has very low car ownership, which has been viewed in other parts or other examples in the city. But from a planner's perspective and looking at the official plan, the city does have policies in a sense where staff can consider reductions to parking based on specific housing types, communal housing, retirement homes, affordable housing, as some of the terminology that was being used. That really much fits the vision of this site. So in this particular aspect, as it relates to the residential, staff recognize the fact this is an intensification corridor. It's on a major transit line. There's access to bike paths. It's very much walkable, as I said at the beginning of the presentation. Mix of uses, there's businesses, there's industry, there's green space. So from that perspective, staff are in support of the reduction as the requested parking ratio for the residential. On the commercial side of things, what is being recommended by planning staff is that the non-residential parking ratio is tied specifically to a general offices. Based on planning staff's discussion with housing staff, that is the primary end use there. So what that means is if a minimum requirement is held to that, in the event that there was perhaps a change of use, so use like a restaurant or even retail, which may generate higher parking requirements, there would be another amendment to the bylaw in the future. So in this particular case, staff are in support of the recommendation to limit the off-street parking requirement for the commercial space, specifically only to general offices. Lastly, just 2 additional provisions were added to the amendment as it was going through the review with city staff. One being the parking space location. Those are the spaces that are facing Winniette. They're right on the property line. There is a minimum setback in the zoning bylaw. The intent of that is to provide some additional screening and buffering. Seeing that it is a city project, the city has the ability to include, perhaps landscaping the boulevard, and some of those details are still being fleshed out through the site plan process. And then lastly, an electrical transformer, there's one that's in the rear yard, which I'm going to say is facing Winniette Street. That final location hasn't been completely determined until they get closer into their electrical design. However, staff are in support of the reduction to both the parking space location and electrical transformer. So as part of our review development considerations, at the time of completing this presentation, there was a one public comment received that's appended to the staff report. A comment came in at the end of the day today, which was provided to the ward councillors. Going through the commentary, most of the comments, or the majority, I guess the common theme between the comments is parking. That's obviously of an interest, but as part of our review of what the concerns are, the residents, I don't think realize the fact of who the end user is of this site. Affordable housing building, pretty much a situation where there's very limited use of the parking area on site. So just want to bring those items to you. Lastly, and I know the applicant spoke to this a little bit, the building is orientated in such a way where it has that street presence along Colburn Street. If you look at the placement of the building too, what's envisioned too is that it gets it away from the residential to the north to minimize some of those impacts that could come about with a taller building. And then lastly, site plan control. So we do have an active, or the city staff has received a site plan application to facilitate this project. It's still under review. Conditional approval has been issued to date. And as we work towards finalizing the site plan application, I believe it's the applicant's intent that construction would start at some point this year. So just to highlight what sort of land area would actually be needed if, and this might add on to Councillor Wall's comment about tiny homes, in the sense that, if this was a scenario where these were all singles, 26 units, you would need almost a full acre, approximately about 5,000 square meters of land just to accommodate the 26 units. So very much a development that's a compact build form, but once again, it is a situation where it is using more efficient land. Lastly, so the proposal is consistent with the provincial policy statement. It aligns very well with the recommendations from the Housing Task Force, where we work towards the target of 506 units by 2030. This would bring an additional 26 units on board, represents intensification with the built boundary, and lastly, provides much needed affordable housing. And I know that's a topic of interest and discussion, but I just wanted to leave that. So in conclusion, planning staff are recommending approval of the zoning bylaw amendment subject to the provisions in the staff report. Thank you.
Councillor Vanderstoep.
Thank you for choosing me first, Mr. Mayor.
You raised your hand first.
Thanks, Jeff. And thanks to everybody who has been working so diligently and hard on this project. It has been fraught with obstacles, and I appreciate the patience and the hard work and the flexibility that went into this. Councillor Weber, myself, and the mayor have been trying to shepherd this along for quite some time. Councillor Sicoli now as well. And I'm aware of I guess there's two issues I want to make sure I address. You talked about landscaping, and that has yet to be determined. I think in the planning stages, we had the initial conversations were about not landscaping for two reasons. One, it tends in that retail area along Colbert Street West to be a bit of a garbage magnet, a garbage net. So anytime you set up any landscaping with bushes or trees or whatever it is to make it look nice once, what it does is it seems to collect problems that our staff have to deal with afterwards. And that leads to my second point. It does take, like it or not, it does take more time to manage something like that rather than just coming in and cutting the grass. What stage are we at in that discussion about landscaping? Are we thinking about doing it or not doing it? If it was up to me and my preferences and the preferences of the constituents in the area who often complain about the garbage, can we just forego the landscaping and just put down grass and a fence?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, to the ward councillor, at this point, the landscape plans haven't been approved. The plans that have been provided to date has included a combination of different shrubs and trees on site. I think at this point, I would maybe suggest that we can look at that in a bit more detail. From a planner's perspective, I think it makes sense to have landscaping that would be non-maintenance as an example. And typically we would fall on a qualified expert like a landscape architect to determine what an appropriate species of plantings would be. But to answer your question, we can consider that and we'll look at that. But at this point, the city hasn't approved landscape plans for the site.
Okay, thank you. It would be my recommendation.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor McCurry.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. Could you tell me what the maximum building height would be on this site?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, well, as it stands today, the mixed use building is not a permitted use. So the site specific would hold to four stories. But if a mixed use building were permitted, it would be capped at 6 stories.
So the answer is 6.
Correct.
Okay. And you cited the setback earlier. What's the permissible setback on this site?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, can you clarify specifically what setback? Because there would be different setbacks depending on front yard, rear yard, side yards.
Let's have them all.
Okay. So for a mixed use building, the permissions are, I would say, very permissive in the sense of where you can place the building. So to give you an example, sorry, just pulling up my bylaw here. So once again, building height 6 stories. Rear yard, when you're abutting a residential zone, it has to be 7.5 meters. Side yards, because it doesn't abut residential, they can have nil. Those are some of the generic ones. Front yard, nil as well. So they technically could bring the building right to the property line, the front yard.
So sort of an urban streetscape.
Correct.
Okay. Now, did you call this an intensification corridor?
That's correct, as designated in the official plan.
Do each one of the intensification corridors have a different set of rules?
So that is a policy framework for the official plan. So those policies are consistent across the intensification corridors in the city.
So they're all 6-story.
So the building height provisions comes out of the zoning bylaw. The official plan does not dictate specifically building height as to what would be permitted. It actually indicates what a minimum building height needs to be. So in a particular case like this, it's 3 stories, which they exceed.
Okay. Yeah, of course. All right. Well, thank you very much for that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Jeff, I have a question for you about the land use. So that was your second last slide. You'd zipped through that really fast. So if you were constructing tiny homes on the smallest legally permitted lot, you did that analysis, how much more land would you need in terms of multiples? I know you talked about square footage and acreages. Would you need 5 times more land? Would you need 2 times more land? How much more land would you need?
So you need about 3 times more. So just to put in perspective, and I know the slide's not on the screen, but as proposed today, the property sits on 1,940 square meters. And if 26 units were proposed with the smallest lot size for single, which is 270 square meters, you would need 7,020 square meters of land. So to put that in acres, property's currently about half an acre, and you would need about 1.24 acres to put 26 homes on it.
That's a lot of numbers. What's the multiple?
3.
3, okay. And did you include in that analysis that you'd probably need some of the land available to do like laneways?
So that analysis is just premised on what the net area is specifically, and it assumes a minimum lot area based on what the smallest single is.
Right, but if you have to run a laneway amongst all these units, you'd need more land.
Correct. Like this would be a bit of a challenging property. I mean, if it were individual singles, they will be all under one ownership. But when you start factoring in, your landscaping, hard surfaces, walkways, laneways, private roads, it would definitely eat into that 26 units.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Committee, any other questions? Not seeing any. Thank you very much, Jeff. So this is the stage of the committee hearing where the public has a chance to speak to the matter either in for or against. And we did not have anyone register to speak to us through the virtual connection. So I'm going to ask those members of the public that are here today, is there any member of the public who's in attendance this evening that would like to speak to this application? If so, you would come forward to the delegates table. You would state your name and address for the record and then provide your comments. So is there anyone? Yes, please step forward. You've done this before, so you know the routine. Right.
My name is Sandra Bigger. I live at 92 Superior Street in Brantford. I did live probably about a block away from the area that you're discussing for many years. But what I'm interested in is, will there be pets allowed in this building? I think that makes a little bit of difference on how you're going to handle green space, trees, landscaping and that sort of thing. So will this be a building that includes pets? Parking for staff, huge concern. The staff that comes in, the housing staff that comes in they'll be coming in vehicles, absolutely. And they will want to park these vehicles somewhere and not across the street, having to cross Colburn Street West. I would assume they'd want convenient parking that would serve their needs in going in and out of the building. Has anyone considered solar panels or connections for hybrid and electric cars? Why not really show all of Ontario that we are taking the lead on this thing, and let's put some solar panels in place to save on the use of the utilities, and also consider looking into the future and look at maybe electric connections for hybrids or for electric cars. You will hear this from me a lot, because anytime I'm able to converse on this, this will be one of the things I'll be discussing is, let's look ahead. Let's try and save energy and reduce our carbon footprints by being responsible governmental people in trying to do the best we can for the future generation. I did read Mr. Rothberg's letter from Sonberg Management Limited that was attached with the documents. Has someone spoken to him? Will he know what's going on? I think since he took the time to write the letter and be concerned, that he should have some kind of discussion from the people that are developing this property and something to make him feel like his items are being considered. The other letter that council received just this evening, obviously I don't have that. I wonder what the timeline for putting this building together is. And the other thing is, we're going a little bit against what we were trying to do with the landscaping by not putting any trees in there, because the big thing has been to put some new trees in for any trees that are removed, or just to encourage oxygenation as well as environmental issues. So this is something that if there's only going to be grass, we're not going to have the opportunity to put a few trees and some landscaping in to try and keep the carbon footprint at the minimum. Those are the only issues that I was wondering about, and I wondered if any of them had been considered or discussed.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Those are some very good questions, and the applicant does have an opportunity to come back, and that's usually when they respond to the questions that members of the public raise. Any committee member, or is there any member of the committee that has a question for Sandra? Councillor Wall.
Hi, Sandra.
Hi, Joshua.
It's great to see you every week. Even better when you share your thoughts with us. Can you tell me more about this letter?
Well, the letter was in the package that you received. I read through the package, and there was a letter from Mr. Rothenberg, and he was very concerned about the parking issue and also about the number of units that are being there. It was a part of the package. Part of the way through, just a very small letter in there, one-page letter. And he seemed to feel that there should be lesser units on the footprint as opposed to 25 units. He seemed to feel that 10 maximum would be more acceptable. Now, there's got to be some kind of compromise there between 10 and 25 that would be workable with both parties, I would think. But the least he needs is acknowledgement of the fact that his letter was there, it was presented, and that it's being considered.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Sandra. Hopefully we'll have answers to some of your questions very shortly.
Okay. Thank you.
So is there any other member of the public who is here tonight in the chamber that would like to speak to this matter? If so, please come forward and follow the same procedure that Sandra Bigger just followed. Seeing nobody run forward, I'll have to say it one more time for a third time. Is there any other member of the public who is present tonight in the chamber that would like to speak to this matter, either for or against? This is your opportunity to do so. Well, seeing no other member of the public, we'll then move. Odette will have you back, please, to, if you wish, to respond to some of the information and questions that arose during the first part of the hearing.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to answer some of the questions that kind of came up, some of the comments, I'm going to get Marlene and Deb to help me answer the pet question. I'm not sure if that's something that we know the answer to right now, but I'll let them answer that if there is an answer right now. Staff parking was one of the things that was brought up. So again, this is a low support program. So there is not full-time staff out here. So it's staff just comes as needed and on occasional basis. So there's not staff parking that's required on a daily basis. And again, the tenants that are here will not, very, very likely not have vehicles. So basically the parking that we do have, we feel that it is adequate for the uses that we need. Landscaping again is something that we will work out with the city through the site plan process. If there are trees that are required for screening purposes, etc., again, we will work with the city to ensure that the landscaping that we propose is the proper landscaping for this site. With respect to providing solar panels and providing for hybrid cars, that's something that the city will have to determine if that's a priority. Again, the priority here and the funds for this is to ensure that we house as many people as possible and that we support these people that are coming out of the homelessness and into these units. That's our priority, for the city's priority for this development. And again, if Deb or Marlene want to add anything else to that, please help me. Thank you.
Yes, through the chair. I'll try to answer some of the other questions. So pets are allowed, tenants are allowed to have pets. There are reasons why someone might not be able to keep a pet if they're causing problems, but people are allowed to have pets. Now, these units are very small, so we will be looking at encouraging people to have small animal pets. Pets are important to have for emotional support. The parking, I just want to point out that the parking that we were talking about, extra parking, is not across Coburn, it's across Winniett, the back. And that's not a very busy street compared to Coburn. And so if people need to cross the street, that shouldn't be an issue. We always look at solar opportunities if there's funding that comes along. As you know, there's a cost to putting solar in place. There's also some benefits to paying for different parts like utilities, but we have to, we look at all sorts of opportunities to get funding and grants to do that. And that is an extra, it's not built into the current budget. The timeline, I think, was another question. The goal for this project is to have it completed by the end of the year. We are looking at having the record of site condition and approvals by the fall with foundation permits and building permits, and then we can assemble up the modular units and meet that completion date. So that's the timeline for the building. There might be a few more other ones, but I think I'll stop there. Thanks.
All right, Odette, is there anything else you want to add before I throw the floor open to questions of you?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that's all from us.
So committee members, does anybody have a question for staff or Odette? Seeing no raised hands, thank you very much, Odette. So that completes the statutory public hearing portion of this particular item, and I'm now closing the public hearing. And so I'd ask Councillor Vanderstel, I believe you've got the motion to item 5.1. Would you please state your seconder and read the resolution?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Moved by myself, seconded by my ward mate, Rosicoli, Councillor Rosicoli. A, that zoning bylaw amendment application PZ 1622 submitted by IBI Group on behalf of the Corporation of the City of Brantford affecting lands at 177 Colburn Street West to change the zoning from, of the lands from general commercial zone FC8 to general commercial exception 105 zone FC8 105 to permit a mixed use building with 26 dwelling units and 201 square meters of ground floor commercial space be approved in accordance with the applicable provisions as noted in section 9.2 of report 2022-391. And that B, pursuant to section 3418 of the Planning Act, RSO 1990, CP 313, the following statement shall be included in the notice of decision. Regard has been had for all written and oral submissions received from the public before the decision was made in relation to this planning matter as discussed in section 8.2 of report 2022-391. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, the floor is open for discussion on the resolution before us. And I have several in the speaking order, first being Councillor Sikoli.
Thank you. I have a pet peeve, and it's the misuse of affordable housing. And I think there's attainable housing, and then there's affordable housing. And attainable housing is a house that's priced reasonably for people like you and I to purchase. And then there's affordable housing, which speaks to the socioeconomic challenges that are before us. And this development is affordable housing in its truest form. It's a transitional housing, it's emergency shelter. It allows people to get back on their feet in a dignified way. The commercial space, we've had a lot of conversations with staff. We're going to look at filling that with office space that's going to enhance and encourage the life of the residents who are going to be living here. This project, I'm proud. I know I came in at the tail end of this, but I'm proud to have my hands on it, at the very least at the end of it. And I just want to commend Councillor Vanderstel, my predecessor, Councillor Weaver, and of course, all of the staff in the housing department for putting this together. This is affordable housing in its truest form. And I have to support this tonight. And I hope that we'll see this as a unanimous decision this evening. Thank you.
Next, Councillor Wall.
Thanks, Chair Davis. So I often come into this council chamber super excited about the items that are on the agenda. And am I excited about this? I am extremely excited about that. How often has a project that checks nearly every one of the boxes come across our desk? This is amazing work by amazing people doing amazing things. And I don't want to understate that this is amazing. Housing for people who desperately need housing. How do we do more? How do we do 20 more of these projects and then another 20 after that? How do we build them bigger? How do we build them higher? How do we get the 1,700 people who are waiting for a house off that list and into houses? It's with projects like this. Like, how cool is this? I remember when this was just a discussion. I remember when we were just talking about doing stuff like this and how far we've come. I want to sincerely thank every single human being who's had a hand in bringing this. I hope it is incredibly successful. I hope that any errors or any mistakes, we learn from them and we do it bigger, we do it better, and we help build homes for people. I can't wait for this to be unanimously supported as well. Did I mention I was excited about it?
All right, Councillor Wall's excited. Okay. Councillor Antosky.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think my colleagues have been hitting on one of the points I wanted to make. It's really important that we qualify that there are several levels of housing needs. And this is one where perhaps the office space could be used to use some wraparound services. For anyone who's familiar with Marlene Avenue, that does have full-time staff, and still there's only maybe 1 or 2, maximum 3, 4 if I go to work at the gardens, parking spots that are ever used. So I am fully supportive of the reduction in parking spaces. And as Councillor Wall and Councillor Sikoli said, this is a dignified way to put a roof over someone's head and help them get on with life and have the supports that are needed. We also have a lot of people that are on our housing list that will require different types of housing, and that's what we're working on. So it's just really important for people to know that this is a very specifically built building. And I know we've heard a lot about it on social services, and this has been a very quick evolution to get here. And so I am also very happy to see this here and happy to support all the great work that's been done.
Are you excited?
And I'm excited.
Councillor Sluss.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to confirm with staff that while we're lumping this as affordable housing, which I guess in all intents and purposes it is, but it's actually geared to income housing, is it not? Affordable has very expensive rents for somebody that's in the situation these folks are in. This is geared to their income. Can someone comment, please?
Through the chair to you, the rent that will be charged in this building will be at the level that's affordable to people. So if they're on Ontario Works or ODSP, it'll be at the maximum shelter rate. And if they are working, it'll be at 30%. So it'll be like rent geared to income. However, there is no subsidy that's being added. It's just paying the rent that they can afford given their source of income.
That sounds like geared to their income.
Yes,
Anyway, I won't debate that with you, but that's exactly what it is. This is all made possible by an upper level grant, and it was contingent on some timelines. If this isn't completed by the end of this calendar year, is that fund grant in jeopardy at all? Or have we negotiated extensions?
So through the chair, I'll take that, and then if Deb wants to add anything. The source of that funding is still confidential, and we have been working with that source on an extension, which we've secured. And we're hopeful that we'll be able to make those announcements soon.
I was just kidding. It's not really a grant, is it? Yeah. No, that's okay. I didn't realize this was confidential. And I don't think I divulged the source of that. So hopefully that is all worked out and we get this thing financed and we get it up in the air as quickly as possible. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Good thing you said upper level. Any other discussion?
If I can,
Mr.
Mayor,
Hutchings,
okay.
the answer would be no.
I just want to clarify, Councillor Sluss, some of the you mentioned the word province, some of the provincial money is public and there's another source of funding. So just to, so you can relax, some of the announcements on the SURE funding as well as on the Reaching Home is public monies from the province. Thank you.
That's what I thought, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
I have a question for staff. I guess I'm not sure whether Marlene would answer this or Deb Schlichter, but the original concept for this building, I think, had the target tenant mix would be seniors or over 55 adults, single adults. Is that still the kind of mix we're looking at?
Yes, through the chair. This would be targeted to older adults. We started with saying 55 plus would be where we would look at that age group. We may have to adjust that to 50 plus, but we're looking at the older adult group, which is currently is about 30% of the population on the by name list who are in the shelter system who are not able to move out.
Yeah, will that be applied to the entire building or will there be some market rent? Is there a mix or will it be?
No, the entire building.
Okay, well, that's why I'm excited. I'm excited for different reasons, Councillor Wall. And the reason why I'm excited is because the target market, if I can call it that, is single adults who are not seniors. So it's under 65. It's that 50 to 65 group, and they form proportionally the largest part of our housing wait list. And that's because we've had many developments have been directed towards seniors, but not this particular segment. And so when you, and I'm also excited because we're taking this parcel of land that the city owns, which has really just been sitting there collecting garbage, an eyesore on a major artery that's fully serviced, has a major bus route going right by it. There's a grocery store a block down. It's 3 blocks from the downtown with all the services. So it's really the perfect location for the target tenant mix for this building. Many of them have been waiting many, many years for suitable accommodation. And so that's why I'm particularly excited, taking a piece of land that was hard to find a really good use for to make it productive and turning it into a productive use. That the other aspect to this, which is also very interesting and exciting, is the builder of these units, ANC, is a local manufacturer of modular homes. And so we now have a local industry that's going to be benefiting from this and supplying the units, and will hopefully demonstrate across the province how you can use these modular homes, not just in a 1-story, but in a 3 or 4-story configuration, because they're very affordable. The cost per unit is much less than what it is if it's a typical constructed build. So there's a lot of reasons to be particularly excited about this, and looking forward to groundbreaking hopefully sometime this fall. So not seeing any other raised hands, I'm going to ask Mr. Deputy Clerk to please take the vote.
Item 5.1, application for zoning bylaw amendment TZ-16-22, 177 Colborne Street West, carries unanimously on a recorded vote. Members of the committee voting in favor are as follows: Councillors Vanderstout, Smart, Nantoski, Wall, Van Tilburg, Carpenter, McCreary, Sokoli, and Mayor Davis.
Councillor Carpenter, I now pass the chair back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think that we were remiss, and Councillor Utley sends his regrets. He's a little under the weather and not able to participate tonight, and he wishes us all well in our endeavors. So back to committee of the whole. Administration, to members of the committee, there are 0 delegations to speak to tonight, but we do have a presentation. So I'd like to ask Victoria Coates, Senior Planner, Long Range Planning, to please come forward to speak to item 7.11. And I remind you that you have 10 minutes for your presentation, and then questions will be asked during the debate.
Good evening, Chair Carpenter, members of committee. My name is Victoria Coates, and I'm a senior planner in Long Range Planning. The Planning and Development Services Department is very excited to be here tonight to present a status update on the new zoning bylaw project. So this is a key project in the city's ongoing efforts to improve our development approval process. So preparing a new and modern and flexible zoning bylaw is one of the most effective ways we can streamline our development approvals, which is a major priority of this council. So we are very happy to be moving this project forward. So this project is focused on establishing a new zoning bylaw that will implement the city's new official plan that was approved in August of 2021. The Planning Act requires the city to bring its zoning bylaw into conformity with the OP within 3 years. The new zoning bylaw will also be in conformity with provincial policies, and it will address emerging best practices and development trends. The new zoning bylaw will replace the city's existing zoning bylaw, which was adopted over 30 years ago and has actually been amended more than 700 times. It will also replace the County of Brant zoning bylaw, where it applies to the municipal boundary adjustment lands that were annexed to the city in 2017. The new zoning bylaw will contain the specific requirements for development and use of land. So it will outline things like what type of uses are permitted on a property, minimum or maximum building height, building setbacks from property lines, as well as parking requirements. And the goal is to provide all of this zoning direction in a modern new zoning bylaw that will be easy to read for the development community, for the public, and will provide that greater flexibility that we need in order to reduce the amount of development applications to amend the zoning bylaw, ultimately resulting in improved service delivery and a streamlined development approval process. The city has retained SGL Planning and Design Inc. to assist staff with this project, which consists of a number of phases and is expected to be completed in 2023. So the first phase of the project consisted of reviewing background materials related to zoning to identify any trends or issues that we need to address in the new zoning bylaw. And then the second phase was focused on strategizing for the public and stakeholder engagement component of the project. And then in the third phase, which is where we are today, we were preparing a series of background discussion papers on key topics that will inform the format and content of the new zoning bylaw. And I'll get into the details about exactly what we did in this phase on the next slides, and then I'll finish off the presentation giving a summary of the next phases of the project. So as part of this phase, we consulted with Council's zoning bylaw task force. We also consulted with the Planning Advisory Committee, and we held a virtual public information center and an in-person public information center to get some feedback from the public and stakeholders. And in phase 3, as I mentioned, we were focused on preparing a series of 10 discussion papers. So we worked with the consulting team as well as a larger working group of city staff and GRCA staff to prepare these 10 papers. And as you can see here, this included a variety of topics. So we looked at things like the structure of the zoning bylaw, parking and loading standards, as well as the different categories of zones, so things like residential zones. And in each of the discussion papers, we reviewed the city's existing zoning bylaw, the county's existing zoning bylaw, and compared these bylaws to best practices from other Ontario municipalities. And we also compared them to the policy direction in the city's new official plan in order to identify some options and other preliminary recommendations for the new zoning bylaw. And then finally, we prepared a summary report, which consolidated all of those key considerations from the 10 papers. And that's the report that's attached as Appendix A to the staff report before you tonight. So I'll just highlight a few of the key considerations from this phase of the project. So first off, it's recommended that the new zoning bylaw would be structured so that the zoning categories are going to align with the official plan land use designations or other categories. So for example, the official plan has a core natural areas designation, which identifies the natural heritage features that need to be protected from development. And it's recommended in the new zoning bylaw, we would have a core natural zone, which would implement that designation. So in this approach, you're creating a clear relationship in terms of how the official plan policies are going to be implemented by the zoning bylaw, and it also makes the new zoning bylaw just easier to read. Next, there are several opportunities to simplify the new zoning bylaw, including by removing some of the definitions in the existing zoning bylaw, where they're defining very specific uses that can actually be captured by the definition for a broader use. So for example, florist shop is not something that needs to be defined because it would fall under the definition for retail store. So this is the initial analysis of definitions, but as we move forward and actually write the zoning bylaw, we'll be reviewing this list to make sure that we have all of the definitions that would be needed to interpret the new zoning bylaw. Next, there are several of the existing parking standards. So that's the number of parking spaces that would be required for a specific use. So several of those are recommended to be reconsidered in order to better align with some best practices and in some cases to be able to implement them easier. Now, as part of the feedback we heard from the zoning bylaw task force, we know that determining appropriate parking requirements for residential uses in particular is a primary concern. So as this project advances, further consideration for these standards is going to be required. So that's going to include the project team actually gathering some data about the utilization of parking for existing residential developments in Brantford. And then we'll be reviewing that data along with the input we receive through the consultation we conducted in this phase, as well as the next phases to identify, what those appropriate rates will be for Brantford. And we will be bringing this analysis back to the task force and seeking their input on it. And then finally, after reviewing best practices and new trends we are seeing in other municipalities, there are also some opportunities where we might be adding some new provisions to the zoning bylaw in order to support some of the city's goals. So these could be goals related to things like achieving that sort of balanced residential intensification while also respecting neighborhood character, or supporting active transportation as a feasible mode of getting around the city. And lastly, just looking ahead to the next phase of the project, we will be taking all of the discussion papers, the input we received throughout this consultation, and we will be preparing a strategic directions report, which is going to act as our blueprint for actually drafting the new zoning bylaw. So it's going to set out the structure of the new zoning bylaw, all of the different zones that are proposed to be included, and then any recommendations for those zones. And then continuing the momentum with this project, we will be presenting that strategic directions report to the new council and the public in early 2023 before the first draft of the new zoning bylaw is prepared in phase 5. And then finally in phase 6, we will prepare the final draft of the zoning bylaw, which would be presented to council for consideration and approval. And then in each of these next phases, we will have consultation with the zoning bylaw task force, the planning advisory committee, as well as the public and stakeholders. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Victoria. We will be dealing with questions when we get this on the floor. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Sicoli, please read the motion to place all separated items for consideration consent not previously voted on the floor, and state your seconder, please.
Sure, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor McCreary, that all items for consideration / consent items 7.1 and 7.2 separated for discussion purposes be approved.
Thank you, Councillor Sicoli. So that moves us to 7.11, the item that you just heard the presenter speak to. Any members of council wish to ask any questions? Councillor McCreary, you're first. And then Councillor Van der Stel.
Chair, thank you very much. An excellent report and some really good work by the department. Thank you for that. And it's interesting to be on that subcommittee and to be able to participate in this a little more intensely than most members of councils are. A couple of things. I think we had a brief discussion about perhaps the need for more site-specific things. For instance, if you're building an apartment building on Fairview Drive or on King George Road, close to 403 exits, you probably need more parking per unit than you would down on Grand River Ave, perhaps, where you don't have that desire to get on the highway and go to work. Are we going to be incorporating that type of specific?
Through the chair, yeah, that's something that we are looking at in the next phases of the project. So there are certain areas of the city where it would make sense to have reduced parking standards, particularly in the downtown, versus other areas that maybe don't have that access to transit and mixed use. So yeah, we will be looking at that.
That type of stuff would apply with respect to setbacks and a lot of variables within those areas, right?
Sorry, can you repeat that question? I missed the first part of it.
I'm not sure I can repeat it verbatim because I wasn't listening either. So you might have a different sort of setback if you're in. We talked about it on the earlier project. You might have a zero setback, for instance, if you're on King George Road, but you wouldn't have that if you were on perhaps maybe Grand River Ave, where you wouldn't want that setback that close to the backlot lines for the river.
Through the chair, that's something we will be looking at in more detail as the project progresses.
And I do want to bring up my favorite topic with respect to definitions in the planning department. I noticed that we do carry forward the definition for sidewalk, but I don't see a definition for hallway. I'll just leave that with you, okay?
Thank you.
And now with respect to the interaction between staff and the subcommittee, you may recall there was some discussion about the heights of residential buildings in a 1 and 2 story neighborhood. And there was some discussion about us avoiding the kind of pitfalls, not to put too bad a pun on it, of these really deep basements that you see in Metro Toronto and some of the big urban areas. And I know what we talked about was incorporating the comments from members of the subcommittee into that. But do you think there's an opportunity, and would it be worthwhile for council to actually give direction to staff on some of these critical issues with respect to building height and basement depth, for instance? Just your opinion, I guess.
Through the chair. So we did capture the task force comments, and we've included, I think it's Appendix B in the staff report, which sort of outlines our response at this stage. I don't believe it's necessary to provide specific direction at this point. We have noted those concerns, and they're something that we are working through on. And we, as I said, we will be bringing our strategic directions report back to council and draft. So there will be plenty of opportunities.
When that comes back in the draft form in a year, is it a year from now? I can't recall what our schedule is.
The draft bylaw, about a year.
So that would be an opportunity then for council to start to give some direction where there's choices to be made.
Yes.
Yeah, excellent. Again, thanks for the great work on this.
Thanks.
Sorry, through the chair, if I may just add to some of Councillor McCreary's questions. It's Nicole Wilmot, Director of Planning and Development Services. I just wanted to highlight one of the things that you touched on with respect to the site-specific zoning for parking standards. If you recall, through the task force, staff did receive some direction to take a look at some of the built developments within the city and actually look at some of those real sort of development, examples, and then use that as a way to further inform some of the work that we're doing on the zoning bylaw. So we are currently working with our consultant to get some of that information through, different kinds of surveys and whatnot to bring those examples back to the task force. That will help us there to have those discussions with respect to those specific zoning provisions, and then ideally build them into the zoning bylaw in an appropriate way.
So that would allow us to make decisions based on local scientific investigation, as opposed to comparing to what we do in Barrie.
That's correct. Well, what we will do is we'll have a fulsome analysis and information to help guide decision-making. Absolutely.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor McCurry. Next, I have Councilor Vanderstel. Give the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chair Carpenter. Thank you for a lot of the clarifications. In a follow-up to the question I asked in our first meeting not too long ago, whether or not the designation of core natural is a little bit more restrictive than what might already occur in some site-specific instances. The one I'm thinking about in particular, I'm having to, I think I'll do this maybe. The area north of Shallard, just the extreme portion of lands at the end of Shallard, will, as I understand it, be designated core natural. And having it be and being more restrictive on development or growth, I'm wondering the reasons why it needs to be more restrictive. With it seems to be counterproductive to places to grow. It seems to be counterproductive to the roadways that we've already invested heavily in. And I'm wondering if either you or Nicole would care to comment on why it needs to be restrictive in nature, or more restrictive in nature.
Excellent question. So through the chair to the councillor, again, Nicole Wilmot, Director of Planning and Development Services. So I believe that the area that you're referring to is what we commonly refer to as the Area C sort of designation within our official plan, and has subsequent zoning that supports that. This is an area that through many years of investigation, we've already determined is a highly environmentally sensitive area. However, what we have acknowledged in the official plan is that in order to consider development that is appropriate with within that area, if at all, then further investigation within that area is required from an environmental perspective, also from a servicing constraint perspective as well, transportation access. These are all significant concerns that are only further, exasperated as a result of the tributaries that come off of Dobney Creek. So we do recognize that this is an area of significant environmental concern. However, I also think that there is room for investigation through, reports that may be able to support or look to see if development at all is appropriate within this area. And our OP policy and our zoning provisions will allow for that investigation to happen, making no sort of predetermined notion on whether or not development can occur in this area.
Okay, so more restrictive, but we can negotiate.
Not necessarily more restrictive. However, what we do identify in our OP and through our zoning is that further study is required. So the principal policies exist within that area. They're consistent with our core natural areas policies. However, we do identify that there are specific reports that are required, whether it's an EIS, Hydro-G, those types of studies are required to specifically look at the environmental constraints within that area.
Okay, so a case by case basis, right? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Vanderstel. Mayor Davis, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm not sure whether Victoria, whether you'd answer this or Nicole, but I'm going to raise a couple of questions that are often put to me by members of the public. And the first one has to do with parking. And, parking is often a very lively issue, shall we say. We saw it tonight in a planning application. And I really find it frustrating that we don't have a lot of good data about how many parking spaces are actually used in our city in townhouse developments and medium density apartment buildings. We hear from builders and developers, well, our parking lot sits half empty. We hear from residents that building that's in our neighborhood, there's spillover parking all over our neighborhood. So, and I'm always surprised there isn't more data, like the actual experience in our community. Will there be an attempt to collect and obtain some of the actual data of what's really happening?
Through the chair, yes. So we heard that concern from the zoning bylaw task force, and we are incorporating that work into the next phase of this project. So we're currently taking a look at existing developments in Brantford, townhouse developments, apartment developments, similar type uses. And we will be contacting, property owners or landlords, condo boards, to work with them to get that information. So we actually have the data about how many parking spaces are there, how many are used, how many are for visitors, that sort of data. So we will be presenting that information to the public, to the task force in the next phases of this project once we collect that data.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. So we're making that decision based on real data, real evidence, not what, depending on who you are, what you believe to be the case. Another concern, and we heard it tonight from a member of the public in attendance who spoke to the Planning Act during the planning hearing, and that is, will we in our zoning bylaw, maybe you don't do it in zoning bylaw, but will we be mandating, for example, in an apartment building that a certain number of the parking spaces have to have available charging stations for electric or hybrid vehicles?
Through the chair, so that is one option that we have identified as something to consider as we move forward with this project. In our review of other municipalities, it's not something that's very common right now, but we know sort of the trend is moving that way. So we are looking at considering that in the new zoning bylaw.
Right. Kind of similar in nature. What about regulations or rules in regards to, especially for apartment buildings, bicycle parking? Because I believe we're probably going to see more people biking given the cost of transportation. Private transportation is just increasing rapidly.
Sure. Through the chair, certainly bicycle parking is quite common in other municipalities. And that's something that we are, recommending that would be included in the new zoning bylaw for uses like apartment buildings and mixed use buildings as well.
Okay. My last question, kind of similar in nature. So it's in the context of townhouses or apartment buildings. And next year we're bringing in the Green Bin Organic program. And already when it comes to Blue Box, there are a number of apartment buildings that aren't really set up for a blue box program, let alone a green bin program. So will there be anything in the zoning bylaw in particular dealing with stacked townhouses or apartment buildings that would require something or some provision, something that would accommodate the different types of refuse collection that we're going to be having in the future?
Through the chair, we'll have to take a look at if that's something that's included in the zoning bylaw. Certainly in our site plan manual, we can cover off the locations of that sort of thing, but we will take a look at that as we draft the new zoning bylaw.
Great. Thanks very much. And last thing I'd like to say is this is a really tremendous effort on the part of planning staff and also the consultant that is working with them. It's something that is really desperately needed because we have so many amendments, such a hodgepodge of bylaws and amendments, and it's really very confusing to figure out what's allowed and what's not allowed for any particular piece of land. It also encourages a lot of rezoning applications that probably would not be necessary if we had really good up-to-date zoning bylaws. So it's a great effort. Obviously, it follows the official plan. And I want to commend staff and the consultant for the work done so far and the work that's going to be done.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilor Van Tilburg and then Councilor Sluss. Councilor Van Tilburg, give you the floor.
Yeah, I'm just looking through some of the questions and comments in the appendixes because we always hear about it. It's always about the parking. And then I caught this one that was rather interesting. And it said, do municipalities using similar rate of proposed parking for apartments in Brantford, one space per 0.25 per visitor, have transit systems that are similar to Brantford transit systems? And the answer was that yes, this rate's similar to municipalities that have higher order transit. So my question to you is, one, what is higher order transit? And where are we in compared to that? And two, what is a similar community when comparing that transit system?
Through the chair, so higher order transit would refer to like subways, LRTs, bus rapid transit. So Brantford doesn't have higher order transit. So when we're looking at similar municipalities, something I think maybe St. Catharines was a similar rate. So they just have a bus system like Brantford would have and has a similar parking rate. But again, as we mentioned in some of the previous answers to questions, we are still, that was a preliminary consideration for parking rates for apartments. So we are still going to be taking a second look at those numbers and getting some more data to inform the recommendations for the new zoning bylaw.
And when you make parking, it basically is a uniformed solution, is it not? Like one size fits all for what is created?
In terms of?
When you're determining the parking.
Like the rates of parking?
Rates, yes.
So the rates apply to different uses. There are options to consider applying different rates in different areas of the city. So there's different tools we can use like overlays.
And that's what I wanted to get at.
Yeah.
So that because we all hear about the parking and I do believe it is different per neighborhood, per location, where they are and what is expected of the community that are moving into that area. Because, I believe you're trying to get a certain clientele to adapt to a certain type of lifestyle and their parking needs may be very different as we just heard earlier today. So that's why I was asking these questions. And so they are still works in progress. Is that my understanding?
That's correct.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor Van Tilburg. Councilor Sluss, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you. It's a good report. A lot of reading, but a good report. We talk a lot about plugins and that for electric vehicles, which rightfully so we should be. But we never talk about if you get into an older age building and there's a lot of scooters, they need a place to charge them. They need a place to store them as opposed to being in their unit, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. But I think a lot of folks do that because they don't have the option to put it somewhere where it's secure and where it can be charged. Is that something we're contemplating moving forward?
Through the chair, that's not something we had considered up to this point. I haven't heard that comment yet, and I don't think it's come up in our review of other municipalities, but it's something we can take a look at in the next phase.
I'd appreciate it. If you look around the streets, there's a lot of them out there that they got to go somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sless. I have no one else on the list. I just wanted to say to Victoria and to the planning staff, I attended some of the public information sessions that were very well organized, and I was really impressed with the way everyone was able to answer their questions and receive their answers. Even if you moved on and went back, it still worked out very fine. I was very impressed with the process. So thank you very much for that. Now I'll call the question.
Item 7.1.1, new zoning bylaw project discussion papers and summary report carries unanimously on a recorded vote. Members of the committee voting in favor are as follows. Councillors Vanderstout, Sless, Martin, Nantoski, Wall, Van Tilburg, Carpenter, McCreary, Sokoli, Mayor Davis.
Thank you, Chris. And we're moving on to 7.13, Indigenous Competency Training and Implementation Plan. Financial impact is 185,000. And Councillor Martin, you asked for this to be separated. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's quite a lengthy report, and it's training that's going to be very good and very needed. I do, however, think that for the one group, the non-supervisory full-time employees, the training that's being recommended is a little over the top, and I think it should be the same as for the next group. So I'd like to move an amendment that the group identified in 9.3 be treated the same as the group identified in 9.4 to get the same level of training. It's something that'll reduce our cost, and it's still giving the employees the training. And I'm not sure, but I personally think that's the right way to go, and I'm hoping for a seconder for my amendment.
I don't see a seconder. Oh, I do see a seconder. Councilman Timber?
Yes, I wish to second that.
Okay, it's on the floor. You can speak to the amendment now.
Yeah, I've been through some various trainings in my full-time job, and some of them are good and some of them are not so good. And I'm not really sure how this is going to shake out. I'm hoping this is going to be some good training, but I do think that what's being recommended for the one group is a little bit over the top, and it's more expensive than what is recommended for the next group. So there's some cost savings with this. And I just hope that members of council will see the benefit of making this change and have this go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Martin. Councilor Toski, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff, I'd like to understand from staff why there might be a separation and what the thought process is behind that, and would it be detrimental to group them into another class?
So if I can, through Mr. Chair, Brian Hutchings, CEO, I think Anita's coming up as well. I'm buying you some time, Anita, while you come up. Lucas Isaacs is trying to log in. He's in the waiting room, and he's worked extensively with Anita on this, obviously our Indigenous Affairs advisor. So we're having some technical problems getting him in, but he was very involved with the levels of training, and maybe Anita can work close with Lucas on this. Maybe she can add some comments before Lucas can come on.
There we go. Okay. Good evening, members of council. Anita Saloki, Director of Human Resources. Through you, Chair Carpenter, to Councillor Nantoski, and thank you, Brian, for buying me some time. The reason that we have this extensive program laid out for the non-supervisory full-time employees is because it really captures a lot of the breadth of knowledge that non-supervisory full-time employees would need to know. There's a lot of different components in this particular program dealing with the residential schools and their lasting impact, the Indigenous life and teaching, Indigenous teaching methods, the impact of Confederation and the Indian Act. So a lot of this information will really be beneficial for non-supervisory full-time employees. It goes far beyond a brief session through our Indigenous Affairs advisor. which is really focused on our part-time seasonal temporary employees and the advisory and board committee members. So the non-supervisory full-time employees really ought to have something more extensive than a brief 1.5 hour session.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Toski. Any further speakers to the amendment? Seeing none, Chris, I'm going to call the question on the amendment.
The amendment to item 7.1.3 is lost and recorded vote of 1 to 8. Members voting on the prevailing side are as follows. Councillors Sless, Antosky, Wall, Van Tilburg, Carpenter, McCreary, Sokoli, Mayor Davis. Members voting for the amendment, Councillor Martin.
Okay, the motion as unamended. I have Councillor Wall. You have the floor, sir.
You came all the way up here. Anita, I might as well ask you a question. What would we have to do for everybody to get the same training? The opposite of what we just voted on.
Through you, Chair Carpenter, to Councillor Wall. We would need to dedicate staff time to be able to attend the various sessions. That would be particularly part-time seasonal and temporary employees. That may be a challenge for them. Quite a few of them are students, seasonals, that they may not be able to take the full day session. And obviously there's a cost associated with the more advanced or more extensive program.
Anybody can answer what that cost would look like? And then is it not something that could be recorded and presented to staff, or is there an interactive element to it?
Through you, Chair Carpenter, to Councillor Wall. There would likely be an interactive component to it. Doesn't mean that we couldn't offer it as a virtual sit-down kind of session. But whether staff would really be interested in and available to do that full day session is really questionable. A lot of those part-time employees are students, and for them to spend a whole day doing that, I'm just not sure that we'll get the buy-in. But we can certainly put that forward if that's something that council wants to do.
Now?
Through the
How
chair.
about before council? Could you?
Sorry, pardon me?
I guess I kind of understand the different levels of training. Do you know what I mean? It's just, this is really important. I know you know it's important, so I'm not trying to imply that. Especially given our position and where we are next to the largest Indigenous population in the country. And to me, if we're going to train at a certain caliber for certain people, then that training should just be uniform across the board. I don't necessarily know if that's something I'm willing to do right now, but we still have another meeting to discuss this, right? So perhaps we'll continue this conversation offline. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Wall. Councillor Van Tilburg.
So what exactly would part-time staffers receive?
Sorry, through you, Councillor Carpenter, to Councillor Van Tilburg. The information that would be provided to part-time employees and advisory board and committee members is about a 1.5 hour session that would be led by our Indigenous Affairs advisor. He would be providing general information around a lot of the components that are outlined in the non-supervisory full-time employees, but much briefer, high-level overview for those particular categories. So enough to be able to have some concept of it, but not enough to be able to speak to it in any great detail.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Van Tilburg. Seeing no further speakers, call the question.
Item 7.1.3 carries unanimously on a recorded vote of 10 to 0. Members of the committee voting in favor are as follows. Councilors Vanderstel, Slash, Martin, and Toski, Wall, Van Tilburg, Carpenter, McCreary, Sokoli, and Mayor Davis.
Thank you, Chris. Moving on to 7.1.5 is lease of lands from Grand Erie District School Board for Green Bar Public School at 33 White Oaks Drive, or Avenue. Councilor Martin, you asked for this to be separated. Give the floor, sir.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank staff for coming up with a solution to a long-standing problem. This is a situation where parents with toddlers were told you can't use the playground equipment because it's near the school. And that just didn't sit well with a lot of parents, and it caused a lot of problems. And the school ended up removing the playground equipment because it was close to the school. And kids had the nerve to actually play on the playground equipment. Can you imagine? So what this does is this provides a location where the playground equipment can be installed by the city in an area that we're leasing, so that parents can actually take their children to the playground and let them play on the playground equipment. So this has been an aggravation for the neighborhood for a number of years. And this will finally get a resolution to this longstanding problem. And I'm very thankful for staff for working this through and coming up with a solution that will have lasting impact on families in the neighborhood. And I hope this passes unanimously because this is for the kids in the area.
Thank you, Councilor Martin. Councilor McCreary.
Chair, thank you very much. Just to add some commentary to what Councilor Martin said. Quite often it remains up to the individual principal to decide who can come and go on playground equipment during the daytime. I think it's generally held by the board that they don't like strangers on their property and they don't like folks interacting with kids while they're out there during the school day. So this is an ideal solution to what has been referred to as a pretty long-standing problem. And I want to thank especially Rick Cox for his efforts on this. He's been working on this for a number of months. And as Councilor Martin said, we can hope for a unanimous vote on this. We can also advise that there will be some further things that we'll be bringing to this table with respect to supporting the neighborhood association and the parent council in respect to funding their playground initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor McCreary. Seeing no further speakers, I'm going to call the question.
Item 7.1.5 carries unanimously on recorded vote of 9-0. Members of the committee voting in favor are as follows. Councilors Vanderstel, Slash, Martin, and Toski, Wall, Van Tilburg, Carpenter, McCreary, and Mayor Davis.
Thank you. That brings us to 7.1.6, item 2 on the agenda, and that's Planning Committee Pilot Project, cost of $75,520 to be funded from provincial grant, $62,520 and $13,000 funded from council's priority. And the reason this is being separated is there's 5, the mayor's officially on the committee, and there are 5 spots for the ward councilors. So I'm looking for volunteers for those spots. First, I see Councilor Vanderstel for Ward 1, Ward 2.
I would like to volunteer Councilor Dudley.
I seen Councilor Slash put both his hands up. And they can work that if you need to switch it. Ward 3. I see it's Councilor McCreary put his hand up, and Ward 4 I would volunteer. As Cheryl was pointing at me. Ward 5, Councilor Van Tilburg. Thank you. Any questions or comments on the rest of the items on section 2? Councilor Slash, go ahead. You have the floor, sir.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we had discussion. I said on this committee, Councillor Utley chairs it, and I think we're going to have a real close look at this if we continue to do it, because what it's doing, it's committing half of council to 1 full day every week, and it's a day shift. It's from 9 in the morning till 4 and can be extended. Anybody that is thinking of running and sitting on council that has a full-time job is not going to be able to do it. So it's going to become interesting to see the dynamic and how that's going to work. But it's going to put some folks in jeopardy and other folks unduly burdened. So I think we have to look at the workload here just to see exactly how this can be handled. I have a few ideas. I know the committee had a few ideas, but we'll wait and see how the pilot works, and then we'll go from there. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Slash. Any further comments? Seeing none, Mr. Clerk, call the question as amended. Friendly amended.
Item 2 of the Building Construction Process Review Task Force report carries unanimously on a recorded vote of 9-0. Members of the committee voting in favor are as follows: Councilors Vandersteldt, Celeste, Marn, and Toski, while Van Tilburg, Carpenter, McCreary, and Mayor Davis.
Thanks to the committee for moving through those items as quickly as we did. Now it moves us to resolutions. And we have 8.1 in Councillor Utley's absence. Councillor Celeste has agreed to move this. Councillor Celeste?
Yes, thank you. As you indicated, Mr. Chair, Councillor Utley can't be here this evening, but he asked if I would move that. And I've spoken to Councillor Martin, who has agreed to second the motion, and it reads as follows. Whereas concerns from Brantford homeowners have been voiced regarding single-family homes being purchased for purchases other than family residency, which is a factor in driving up prices of homes and the value and making home ownership out of reach for first-time home buyers. And whereas an article in the Toronto Star Sunday edition reports a case where foreign national is being investigated for money laundering and by investing in houses and housing developments in Vancouver. And financial and law enforcement experts say this problem extends to other Canadian cities, most notably in the GTA. And whereas the province of British Columbia created an expert committee to investigate money laundering in residential real estate, which made several recommendations to the provincial government to change the provincial law and for the province to make changes to federal law to prevent this type of money laundering from occurring. And whereas the Council of the Corporation of the City of Brantford is very concerned with the rising cost of housing caused by money laundering through the purchase of residential real estate, now therefore be it resolved that the Council of the Corporation of the City of Brantford respectfully calls upon the province of Ontario to create a similar expert committee as was done in British Columbia to invest what regulatory action can be taken to better combat money laundering in Ontario, in the Ontario real estate market, and that the Council of the Corporation of the City of Brantford respectfully calls upon the province to implement whatever legislative changes may be necessary to combat money laundering in Ontario, the real estate market. And whereas the Brantford Police Services requested to establish a tip hotline for suspected money laundering, and that the city clerk be directed to forward a copy of this resolution to the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, AMO, Ontario Big Mayors Caucus, OBCM, and the list of other Ontario municipalities with the request that those municipalities pass similar resolutions, and that the city clerk be directed to forward a copy of this resolution to the Honorable Doug Ford, Premier of the Province of Ontario, and the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, MP Larry Brock, and MPP Will Bouma. I think it's what we're asking for is some information back with this, Mr. Chair, and I think it's we're noticing a lot of absentee ownership in the city, and it's typically coming out of the GTA. Again, that's very generally speaking, but I think it's something that has been identified elsewhere, and perhaps we can investigate it and maybe cut off a problem before it becomes a problem. So I would ask for support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Celeste. I see no other speakers, so I'll call the question.
Item 8.1, potential threat to residential home ownership, carries unanimously on a recorded vote of 10-0. Members of the committee voting in favor are as follows: Councillors Vandersteldt, Celeste, Marn, and Toski, Wall, Van Tilburg, Carpenter, McCreary, Sokoli, and Mayor Davis.
Next resolution is 8.2, notice of motion deadline. Councillor McCreary, please move your resolution and state your seconder, please.
Chair, thank you. I'm the mover. Councillor Martin is the seconder. This is the notice of motion resolution. Whereas on September 22nd of last year, the Meeting Process Review Task Force approved recommendations set out to improve meeting processes through the lens of accountability and Lean Six Sigma, which included implementation of a notice of motion deadline for members of council. And whereas the purpose of the notice of motion deadline was to enhance staff's ability to provide support and resources toward assisting members of council with their notices of motion and to reduce process waste, according to the 8 wastes of Lean. And whereas the deadline ensured proper notice to members of the public of incoming resolutions, and whereas waiving of notice provisions for notices of motion, although at times are necessary, limits members of the public to delegate, participate in the democratic process. And whereas the implementation of the notice of motion deadline process improvements have been realized through greater staff collaboration, less amendments to resolution, and greater access for members of the public, and whereas process improvement initiatives are incremental and continuous, And whereas since the implementation of the notice of motion deadline, there have been 44 notices of motion introduced since November of last year. And whereas of the 44, 5 notices were introduced as notice of motion by waiving the rules, and 7 were considered as resolution by the waiving of the rules. Now, therefore, be it resolved, the staff be directed to provide an analysis of the notice of motion deadline and report back to council regarding process improvements. And I must say that I did get quite a tutorial yesterday from Mr. Gauthier, and it's really quite interesting for councillors to see the interstaff workings. And Mr. Gauthier has developed an evidence-based way of determining how we want to proceed with this. And most of it's because some of us old dinosaurs can't carry our thoughts from one month to the next. So we're going to be having staff take a look at how we do this. And I guess we're probably going to be kept abreast of as those dates approach us for deadlines. And we're also going to be looking at some future changes as well, which Mr. Gauthier and clerk staff are considering when we look at some of the changes we make to our planning process, I guess probably later this year, early next. So I would hope everybody, including the mayor, would support this tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor McCurry. Councilor Wall, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chair Carpenter. You're doing a great job. And might I say that may be perhaps to an excellent deputy clerk and an excellent clerk's department in general. This resolution is, well, to quote myself, exciting. Sorry. No, we don't often hear from the clerk's department. And I know that in my short time here, they are an invaluable resource to every single member of council. They make sure we do things right. They keep things going during the meetings. They provide thousands of hours of background work, making sure that every one of our agendas are put out to the public, that the minutes are all correct. It is just, honestly, to me, it's a job that I couldn't imagine myself doing. I just don't have that kind of attention to detail. I don't have that kind of patience. And this motion and a review of our notice of motion rules is just more work for an already taxed clerk's department. But I don't think we would support the motion if we didn't think that they could handle it. And I do just want to offer a sincere thanks to our clerk's department. You guys are incredible. You do amazing work. And I honestly couldn't do my job without you. And I'm thankful you're here. So sorry, but also thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Wall. Mayor Davis, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm also excited because I'm really hoping this analysis will indicate that a notice of motion that's just the title is insufficient and does not qualify to be a proper resolution. And since we have a resolution here in front of us that is more than just a title and actually has a body attached to it, I now understand what it is, and I'm very happy to support it. It's for all the reasons indicated above, I'm very pleased to support this.
Thank you, Mayor Davis, for the levity, and I'm going to call the question. I didn't see your hand up. Councilor?
Yes.
All right,
Yes.
Councilor McCurry, second time speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I didn't raise my hand very high. I would be happy to support the mayor's amendment and consider it friendly if he wished to include that language.
I don't think it's necessary. It's
And
just
point
simply
of
common
order,
sense.
There's no amendment been moved. There's no amendment on the floor. We won't be speaking to each other. We speak to the resolution on the floor. Thank you. I'll call the question then, as was.
Item 8.2, notice of motion deadline carries unanimously on recorded vote at 10-0. Members of the committee voting in favor are as follows. Councillors Vanderstel, Celeste, Martin, and Toski, Wall, Van Tilburg, Carpenter, McCreary, Sokoli, and Mayor Davis.
Thank you. That brings us to 8.3, support for locating a new Brand Haldeman Norfolk Catholic. There's a school board secondary school within the Northern Expansion lands. Councilor McCreary, bring this forward and name your seconder.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much. And let me reiterate what a wonderful job you're doing in the chair tonight. Much appreciated, sir. Councilor Martin is the seconder for this resolution. Reads as follows. Whereas on April 26th of this year, the Brant Haldeman Norfolk Catholic District School Board announced that they had received $45.7 million from the province of Ontario to build a new Catholic secondary school within the Brantford area. And whereas following this announcement, a number of inquiries were made by the chair of the board to staff and councillors of the city regarding availability of approximately 10 to 15 acres of land within the city of Brantford to accommodate a new Catholic secondary school. And whereas following multiple meetings with representatives of the city and the board, the parties agreed that the preferred location for a new Catholic secondary school is the city-owned lands off Powerline Road. And whereas the city-owned lands are subject to the block planning process and require servicing, among other things, in order to facilitate development, and whereas the school board has expressed a desire to see the timelines for development of their secondary school in this area expedited, now therefore be it resolved, A, that staff be directed to enter into negotiations with the school board for the sale of approximately 10 to 15 acres of city-owned land off Powerline Road to the board to facilitate the development of a new Catholic secondary school, and to report back to council with an agreement of purchase and sale for these lands on or before Q4 this year. And B, that staff be directed to report back to council by or before Q4 2022 with a roadmap to expedite the planning and development of a new Catholic secondary school within the Powerline Central Block Plan, taking into consideration the block planning process, development app, and servicing requirements, and the board's request to commence construction by 2024. And Mr. Chair, this is a real bit of good news for us. And we have a partner that's in a real hurry. And part of bringing this forward is to ensure that our staff receive all the support they need to provide all the support they can provide to the Catholic School Board so that we can enjoy this great partnership and have a new Catholic Learning Center in the annexed, new, fresh, beautiful Third Ward. Thank you, County of Brant, for that gift to us, although we do pay through the nose for it. So I hope everybody would support this today. This is all it's about. There'll be more to come. There'll be more discussions with staff and with the proponent before us. So your unanimous support would be excellent. Let this go forward, and the details will be the details. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor McCurry. Councilor Martin, you have the floor, sir.
Yeah, thank you. One of the hurdles with this project is construction can't begin until the services are there. But what we need to understand is that this construction isn't going to be a few months like the modular build we talked about earlier. This is going to be a fairly long construction process. And for it to have to wait until the services are in place just adds more years to it, when the construction could be going at the same time as the services are being installed. So we need planning staff to find a way to allow this construction to start sooner before the services are involved, knowing the services will be there in time for the completion of this project. So it's something that I'm confident our staff can find a workaround for, and I look forward to something coming back from our staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Martin. Councilor Van Tilburg.
Yeah, it's kind of been brought to my attention that the procedure would almost be consecutive. And while that would be standard, I would believe for many things, you've got to have things in the ground in order to make things happen. There is a timeline that has to be achieved, and there's an understanding that they could do this concurrently. And if there's something that's needed in order to achieve that concurrency with the city, in other words, the resources on our side, the planning, all that may be problematic. I think this would be the time by the council meeting to have some sort of headway on what may be required in order to have that concurrency achieved. Because in my near 8 years here, I have noticed that things happen. A lot of things happen, but it happens at a very slow, snail molasses type pace. And the timelines that they're looking for, 2024, does seem very quick to me. And so I would like to get as much of a reasonable answer to my query as possible by the council meeting. And if you have to send it to all the councilors, that'd be great too.
Thank you, Councilor Van Tilburg. Seeing no further speakers, Mr. Clerk, I call the question.
Item 8.3 carries unanimously on a recorded vote of 10-0. Members of the committee voting in favor are as follows: Councilors Vanderstout, Slash, Martin, Toski, Wall, Van Tilburg, Carpenter, McCurry, Sokoli, and Mayor Davis.
Now we move on to 8.4, and it's the mayor honorarium redirection. Mayor Davis, you have the floor. Please state your seconder.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Seeking a seconder, Councillor Vanderstel. So I'll read the resolution. Whereas on November 23rd, 2021, City Council appointed Mayor Davis to the Grand River Conservation Authority Board of Directors. And whereas members appointed to the Grand River Conservation Authority Board of Directors receive an honorarium in the amount of approximately $2,500 per year, depending on the number of meetings a member attends. Whereas Section 3.2C of the unanimous shareholders agreement entered into between the City of Brantford, the City of Cambridge, and the Township of North Dumfries states that for at least the first 3 years following incorporation, the mayors of each municipality shall be included as members of the Grand Bridge Energy Board of Directors. And whereas members appointed to the Grand Energy Board of Directors receive directors' fees in the amount of approximately $12,000 per annum, depending on the number of board meetings and committee meetings a director attends. Whereas Section 1FB of Bylaw 81, 2014, Council Honoraria Bylaw requires additional benefits paid to a council member from any outside board or committee be paid over or direct to the city. And whereas the mayor requires council approval to redirect honorarium and fees paid for his involvement in outside organizations while acting in his capacity as mayor of the City of Brantford. And whereas the redirection of said honorarium and fees could substantially benefit local charities, now therefore be it resolved, A, that any director's fees the city receives in 2022 from Grand Bridge Energy for Mayor Davis's participation as a director be redirected as follows: 50% to the Brant Community Healthcare System Foundation for the new hospital build, 25% to Novita Women's Shelter Incorporated, and 25% to the Community Resource Service Brantford Food Bank. And B, that any honorarium that the city receives in 2022 from the GRCA for Mayor Davis's participation as a board member be redirected to the Brant United Way. So by explanation, Mr. Chair, this actually follows a template. I got the idea from you. And so we do have, our city's a little unique in that, so any honorarium that's paid to us for organizations we're involved in that make payments to their directors comes to the city. And so in this case, following the precedent that you established, I'd like to see these monies directed elsewhere. And I'd say that these monies are not actually built into the budget. Certainly the monies from the Grand Bridge Energy Group weren't built into the city budget, so it's not as if this is going to affect anyway the city's budget for this year. And in terms of these organizations, the 50% going to the hospital for the new community build. This is very important. We've heard earlier this year that the province has approved stage 1 funding for a brand new hospital that's going to cost like beyond $1.2 billion. It's going to be a huge rebuild consisting of a new emergency department, a new mental health wing, an 8 or 9 story, 440 tower patient unit. But there is an arrangement that the province has that it doesn't pay 100%. It requires the local community to pay 10% of the building and the cost of any equipment or improvements inside the new building. And so that's going to be an order of about $150 to $200 million that our community is going to have to contribute to make this hospital a reality. And if the community is not seen to be getting behind the hospital rebuild, and that if active fundraising programs are not in place, we may not get final approval for the hospital build. There are other communities that have not received final approval. There's 5 stages. We're at stage 1. So it's really important we get behind the foundation efforts to, and this is going to be like a 6 to 10 year effort, behind the foundation's efforts to start building a reserve for the new hospital rebuild. And so I thought that is why I've directed 50% of the amounts that are paid for my involvement in Grand Bridge Energy for the hospital rebuild as a significant donation to that particular project. And of course, Nova Vita, obviously a worthwhile organization that provides a women's shelter and support services for families that are facing domestic violence. And of course, the Brantford Food Bank and the Brant United Way, a great organization. Lastly, I'd say this, you may wonder, well, why does Grand Bridge Energy Board of Directors pay its directors $12,000? It's a huge organization, value of in excess of $350 million, provides hydro in Brantford, Township of Brantford, Cambridge, North Dumfries. It's a very important corporation. It's a major investment for this city. It's overseen by a board of 10, and most of the board of directors, none of them are political appointments other than the mayor's. They're people who are experts in the power industry, or they're engineers, or they're lawyers, or they're finance experts, accountants, and all of them are most of them are all gainfully employed, and they take time, about 2 days a month from their occupations to be there. It's a professionally managed board of directors. The board of directors meetings are really quite challenging. The issues that are addressed are very complex, and the board is an essential component to protecting our investment, ensuring the dividends. So, and that's why if you don't pay, you will not attract to your board the kind of professional qualifications and competence you need for a corporation this size. So, as I said, Mr. Chair, following your precedent, I hope this will receive unanimous support, and hopefully some charities in town will be able to benefit substantially from the efforts that my efforts in respect to these organizations. And last thing I'd say is the Granite Bridge Energy Board of Directors. I mean, the time that I spend on that doesn't come out of time I'd other spend as mayor. It's coming out of time I'd otherwise spend on personal issues. So
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I see no further, Councilor McCurry.
Chair, thank you very much. Typically when this happens, it is the person receiving the honoraria that gets to decide where the money goes. And I think that the donation to Nova Vita and the donation to the food bank is spot on. I do have to think, though, that the $6,000 going to the Brant County healthcare system would not even be a drop in the bucket with respect to the hospital build, perhaps a drop in the ocean. And that $6,000 would go a long way to better helping out Nova Vita and the food bank in its entirety. And I'd leave that with the mayor to perhaps reconsider the money to the health system and perhaps think about sending $6,000 apiece to those other two charities. We know what they do at Nova Vita. We know what they do at the food bank. There's a lot more hungry people in this city than there used to be, and probably a lot more spousal abuse than there used to be. And I don't mean to throw cold water on the mayor's plan, but my estimation is that the money would go a lot further with the other two charities than with BCHS.
Thank you, Councilor McCurry. Seeing no further speakers, I just want to say thank you, Mr. Mayor, for recommending me for this original resolution. Mine from the Grand River Conservation Authority goes directly to the Seniors Resource Center. And I just want to speak to your dedication to the healthcare system. I think while it may seem small, it's the intent that you're leading this donation to the healthcare system and hoping that others will follow in similar fashion with, of course, much larger amounts. So I'm going to now call the vote. Thank you.
Item 8.4 carries unanimously on a recorded vote of 10-0. Members of the committee voting in favor are as follows: Councilors Vanderstel, Sluss, Martin, and Toski, Wall and Tilburg, Carpenter, McCreary, Sakoli, and Mayor Davis.
And moving on into earlier discussion, Councilor McCreary, notice of motion. Would you please just read the title of your motion?
Item 9.1, future consent and minor variance, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And thank you, committee members, for your attention to detail. We are adjourned.